we're not appreciating and enjoying where we are. So, what's the answer? What do we need to do? And I think what the Torah gives us is really a roadmap and a recipe for this. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot, Eizuhu Asher. Anyone know how to say the rest of the verse? Eizuhu Asher, who is rich? Hasamech b'chelko, the one who is happy with what he has. Who is not rich? The one who is living somebody else's life. You know, a wise person once said, what is your currency? You know, we think of currency, right? What's currency? Currency is the thing we buy, money, right? We use to buy and sell things. What is your currency? Think about your own life and ask yourself, what is your currency? You know, I mentioned before about the study with the paraplegic, and some of you may have heard of Christopher Reeves. Have you heard of Christopher Reeves? A little bit before your time. He was the actor in Superman, okay? And he had everything that anyone could ask for. He had good looks, he had money. If he was alive today, he would have probably 20 million, subscribers, fans on Instagram. And this man, Christopher Reeves, was acting in a movie where the actor in the movie became a quadriplegic, and he became a quadriplegic. He fell off a horse, and he lost everything in one moment. He lost everything. He lost his ability to use his entire body. The only thing he could do was use one finger and speak through a special box. And he talks about in his memoir how he didn't even want to live. And his wife stayed with him the whole time. And at a certain point, he became very, very depressed. And then, those of you who know the story, what happened to him? He became a spokesman for people with spinal injuries. And he inspired a lot of people to give a lot of money to research on spinal injuries. And the crazy thing is, at the end of his life, he said in an interview that if he had a chance not to have this happen, if he could go back in time and have this event not happen to him, he would not have taken that choice. He said, because I thought I knew who I was, and when all of that was stripped away from me, I found out who I really am. So often we define ourselves based on our looks, based on our friends on social media, based on what other people tell us about ourselves, based on external things, based on how much money is in our bank account. But in reality, all those things, they come and go. But what our essence stays with us. And on the topic of happiness, I want to share with you another thing from Sean Archer, which also has very strong connection to Torah. So Sean Archer did a lot of work in Harvard University. Okay, he was there was a whole dormitory where he was like one of the main guides in that dormitory. And if I ask you a question, do you think people in Harvard's one of the top 3 colleges in the United States, do you think people in Harvard are more or less depressed than the average college student? Anyone, raise your hand if you think more depressed than Harvard. Raise your hand if you think less depressed than Harvard. Okay. Why do you think they're more depressed than Harvard? You're correct. Why are they more depressed than Harvard? Stress? What do you say?
But they're convinced that Harvard was #1 in their studies, but
they're questioning if Harvard's as good as they think it was? Okay, anyone else?
they have expectations they need to meet.
Explain yourself. What do you mean?
Harvard is the top school, the top students graduate. Be the top student or
You're super warm. You're like very warm. What?
All the top students competed to get in, now all the top students are competing in.
Oh. In Harvard, this is what he came to analysis. In Harvard, who gets accepted to Harvard? The brightest and smartest students from all around the United States. And a few people with connection, and some of their parents went to jail, okay? But mostly it's people with the brightest kid in a whole school system gets accepted to Harvard, okay? Now, take this kid, okay? Take this guy or this girl who lives in Omaha, Nebraska, and was the brightest kid in their whole school system. How good do they feel about themselves? Pretty good? Pretty good. Valedictorian, valedictorian, the best, the best, the best, the best. Let me ask you a question. How much did that person work to get to the point that they got to? Not necessarily. And I actually think, in the research I would like to look deeper, the people who actually work really hard, then this probably won't apply to them as much. I think a lot of times, they didn't actually work so hard, but they're naturally very bright. And they got a lot of credit for being bright. But that's not necessarily something that you did. It's something that you are. And then you get promoted and you get valedictorian and you got accepted to Harvard. And they're on cloud 9 when they're accepted to Harvard. And Emily said, what happens when they go to Harvard? What happens in Harvard? Everybody also is just as smart as them. They're used to defining their sense of self based on the fact that I'm smarter than you and I'm the top percentage of my class. But in Harvard, everyone's smart. So what ends up happening? I don't feel good about myself anymore. And they put a lot of stress on themselves. Now, the reality is you could be in the bottom 5% of your class in Harvard and still get an amazing job. But because they're so used to defining themselves based on others, they can get very, very depressed. So one of the things this Sean Archer would do to try to stop this depression, the first day of class, he would get like 1,000 freshmen into a room, and he would tell them the following thing. I'm going to make a prediction that 99% of the people in this room will not graduate in the top 1%. And they're like, it's like a spear hit them in the chest. What? What do you mean? Top 1%. Of course I'm going to graduate 1%, maybe top 1.1%. But it's true, right? Only 1% can graduate in the top 1%. So one of the main problems that we do is we compare ourselves to others, and we're not living our own life. We're not living our own connected life. So what the Torah teaches us is that to have a really happy life, we have to be able to appreciate what we have. We have to be able to appreciate who we are. Now, how many people in this room are billionaires? Raise your hand if you're a billionaire and you'd like to let us know. Okay? One second, okay? I'm going to tell you right now, every single person in this room is a billionaire. Okay? Now, don't spend it and then send me the bill, okay? But every single person in this room is a billionaire. How can I prove that to you? How can I prove to you that you're a billionaire? So here's very simple proof, not very complicated, okay? Imagine for a moment that you're worth $10 billion. Imagine where you would live. Imagine what kind of your lifestyle. Imagine the whole scenario. What's available to you, what's accessible to you. You have to really put yourself into that headspace. You open the Forbes list and you're there, right there in the top 50 in the country, you know. You are a multi-billionaire. And then, let's say you're a married person, you have a few kids, and you're busy. You're busy spending the money, you're busy enjoying life. Do you see your kids a lot? Maybe not as much as you'd like to, but soon you will. Next year, you're going to make enough that you're going to spend time with your kids. This year, you have a little more responsibilities. You have to solidify the money. Next year, you're going to spend time with your kids. And then the next year, right? And let's say one of your kids got diagnosed, God forbid, it shouldn't be anyone here, but just picture this, with an illness called Usher syndrome. You familiar with Usher syndrome? My wife works with children who are deaf, and some of them have Usher syndrome. It's a syndrome that the children, they start off being able to see and hear. When they're about 7, 8 years old, their eyesight, actually they lose their hearing earlier, and then their eyesight gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and then they lose their eyesight. And imagine that a child of yours had that disease. God forbid. How much of your billions would you spend to try to stop your child from losing their eyesight? How much of your billions would you spend to save your own eyesight? How much of your billions would you spend to be able to walk? How much of your billions would you spend to be able to eat? How much? You're worth 10 billion. How much of the billion would you spend to get that? Any suggestions? What do you think? What do you guys think? How much? Most of it, all of it. So logically, just simple logic, if you had $10 billion and you were willing to give up 9.9 of it, let's say, to keep your eyesight, to keep your legs, doesn't that mean your legs are worth $9.9 billion? But do we appreciate our legs? Do we appreciate our eyesight? Do we appreciate our heart? When do people usually start appreciating their bodies? When a family member gets sick, when they get a scare from a doctor, right? Did you ever see a person, literally, think about this, okay? You're walking down the street, you see a friend you haven't seen in 2 years, and the guy has a big smile on his face, like from here to here. And you're like, did something good just happen? Did you just win a lot of money? And two options, okay? He tells you, I just got accepted to an amazing college that I was trying so hard to get accepted into. I just got engaged. I just got a new iPhone. Any of those options, you'd be like, okay, cool, relax, but nice, good, happy for you, right? Now imagine if he told you, or she told you, I just took an anatomy course, and I found out that my heart, on a regular day, pumps enough blood to fill up a small river. And he's like, oh my God, that's amazing, right? And the person listens to this anatomy class, learns about their body, and is walking around because they just got this amazing treasure they didn't know that they had. I think you tell them to sit down and you tell them to go get medical help, right? But the reality is, each and every one of us should appreciate what we have. And I think one of the most important keys to happiness is being able to appreciate what we have, to be able to appreciate what's around us. And a very, very important part of healthy relationships is being able to do this as well. And I want to give another point that connects to this. It's very important, and if people have their cards, they can start passing them up, okay? It's very important to know the difference between, it's very important to know the difference between effort and results in relationships. Very important, okay? And it's very important to know the difference between, it's important to know the difference between effort and results, and it's important to know the difference between, just 1 second. Let's start with effort and results, and we'll get to the second one soon. It's important to know the difference between effort and results. In our society today, we're very, very focused on results. We're very materialistic. We judge things based on amounts, based on quantity. But in relationships, and relationships is not just between us and our spouse. All of life is made up of relationships. The relationship between us and our family members, between us and Hashem, between us and ourselves, it's all a relationship. Everything in life is made up of relationships. In relationships, effort is much more important than results. And I want to explain to you how this works. Picture you're in a relationship with somebody, okay? And they do something for you. And they do something for you that took a lot of effort for them. How does that feel to you? How does that feel? How do you feel? Let's say they do something for you that's very easy for them. How does that feel to you? How does that feel? What? But here's the problem. Because we are so used to looking at the external, looking at how big our houses are, how much money somebody has, we don't realize that what's really important in life is the effort, not the results. And when we're in a relationship, and this is true in our relationship with our spouse and our relationship with Hashem, what does Hashem want from us more than anything else? What does Hashem want from us? I think He wants us to try. He wants us to show effort. He wants us to make an effort. Because, and the Baal Shem Tov, the first Hasidic master, there's very famous stories about him, where he would go to a shul, and he would say, there's a man in the shul who is literally in Gan Eden. And they would say, where's this man? Is he the big rabbi in the front with the long beard? And they say, no, he's the guy in the back who's sitting on Yom Kippur. He doesn't even know how to read Aleph Bet. He said, how is he so holy? He said, because he is putting in more effort than anyone else in the shul. And I think what's really, really important is to recognize this in every aspect of our relationships. That's the effort that we put in is what the other person is going to feel special. When we put in that effort, that's going to make them feel special. And what's easy for me might be hard for you, and what's easy for you might be hard for me. And that's why in a relationship, you don't even want to compare yourself to your spouse. Because what might be easy for your spouse, let's say you're married to someone who's very outgoing, and that person's able to articulate their thoughts very easily. But for you, it's your whole thing's inside. The spouse who's very outgoing will feel so special if you even just try to articulate your words. But what happens in a lot of relationships, people give up. They say, I can't do what you could do, so I'm not going to even try. And this is where a lot of problems come from. You know, sometimes I talk to a couple as they get married, and they don't have so much money to buy nice things for their spouse, and they don't feel so good about themselves. And I tell them something. I say, imagine you're worth $50 million, and you want to buy your wife a gift, and you buy her a $50,000 necklace. As far as she knows, you don't even care about her. You just shut up money. Just take it. Leave me alone. Because $50,000 for you is nothing. So what do you have to give her in order for her to feel special? Maybe $100,000, $200,000. But if you just got married, and hoping you're not married to a very materialistic person, and you have $1,000 in your bank account, and you buy a $20 thoughtful gift on Amazon, how is your wife going to feel? Like $1 million. Because she knows it's not easy for you, and you put the thought into it. I'll share with you guys a little funny story that I share sometimes with the Emma couples. There was a couple who my wife and I were teaching before the wedding. And the bride says to my wife, we knew them both for a long time, nice people. She's like, my fiance hasn't said I love you, and we're getting married in 3 weeks. And he hasn't bought me a card or given me flowers. So I'm learning with the Khatan, and I didn't tell him that I knew this information, but I just say to him, I'm just curious, have you bought flowers for your fiance? He goes, no. I'm like, do you get her a card? He's like, no. I'm like, listen, it's Thursday night. Before Shabbat, I want you to buy her flowers and give her a card. I said, I'm going to call you after Shabbat to follow up. I call him after Shabbat. I said, no, did you get it? He's like, we went to the florist to finalize arrangements. The florist gave her flowers. I'm like, this guy doesn't get it. It's not about the flowers. It's about what the flowers represent. And I asked him, did you give her a card? He's like, no, is it really important? And I dug a little deeper, and I realized, what's this guy's problem? The problem is that he has a hard time communicating his feelings. So I asked him, I said, did she give you a card? And these were his words to me. She wrote me a 29-page book, okay, of all her dreams and all her aspirations for the marriage, okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with that marriage, by the way. It's actually very healthy to marry somebody who's different from you. One person who's very outgoing. It's healthy to marry someone that's a little more introverted. One person who's very on time. It's healthy to marry someone that's a little bit less on time. It's okay. The only thing you want to look for in a relationship is values need to be aligned. Because if the values are not aligned, big problem. If the values are not aligned, you're going to be in deep water. By the way, a lot of couples have this problem. They make great friends in a bar, okay? But he's going, let's say, towards religion, and she's going away. She's family-oriented, and he just wants to make money. And they made great friends. They're great friends, but they're really bad spouses because their values are not aligned. Because your values is like where you're going in life. If I'm traveling to Florida and you're traveling to California and I meet you on the road, like, oh, let's go together. No, it's not going to work, right? We're going to end up in very different places, right? What I told this guy was, and listen, if you can incorporate this into your relationships, it's a game changer. I said, don't try to be her. I said, do you understand that if you write one little card like this and you scribble something and it says love in there, she's going to feel she won the lottery? And if she did that for you, you throw it out. Why would he throw it out? Because he knows she could do it in her sleep. But she knows that for him to do this is hard. So the very difficulties that we have is actually the opportunities to show effort in those situations and create more closeness. I often ask couples when I do my classes, I say to them, how can I guarantee you that you'll be more in love in 20 years than you are now? Guarantee. Anyone want to know how? What's a guarantee that you'll be more in love in 20 years than you are now? You know what the guarantee is? If you have a mindset that you're growing, that you're building, you'll be more in love in 20 years. Because you know what I can guarantee will happen in 20 years? Problems, issues. But if you look at those issues as opportunities to get closer, you'll be closer in 20 years. If you look at life as static, it's not going to look very pretty over time. But if you look at yourself as growth, it makes a huge difference. And I want to share another idea about relationships, but if people have cards, please pass them up because I'd like to take some of your questions. Maybe go around. What? Yeah, pick up the cards and hand them in so we could try to address some of your questions. But I want to just say two other things. One, when it comes to, remember I said before, it's healthy to marry someone different than you, okay? But I'll tell you where it becomes a little bit of a hazard, okay? Let's say you're very on time and you marry somebody or you're in a relationship with somebody who's very relaxed. That could be very good. But when does it become a problem? You know when it becomes a problem? When you need to get something done, when you need to go somewhere, and the other person, let's say you're very on time, and the other person is late. So what do you end up doing in that situation? You get offended. You say, why are you late? You must not care about me, because I wanted to be on time. So if you're late, it means you don't care. Because for that person, when they don't care, they don't show up on time. But this person comes late because that's just their nature. So it's very important when you're in a relationship to recognize that the person who's different from you, maybe over time you'll be a little bit more like them, they'll be a little bit more like you. You married somebody who's different from you because what? Because you knew internally that two type A personalities, two very on-time people, maybe they're always going to be on time to things, but it might be too stressful, right? I had a situation once, a girl called me. Now, I had a little bit of advantage over you guys because I knew something about this girl, but she called me up and she's like, I have a big problem. I'm dating a guy, and every time I ask him to do something, he takes his time. Whenever he asks me to do something, I do it right away. And then finally, I got fed up. I got fed up, and the next time he asked me to do something, what did I do? I also took my time. And you know what the guy says back to her? He says, Nikama, you're taking revenge, right? Now, 1 second. Who's right? That was all part of that was planned. Okay. Who's right? Who's right? Who's right? You get the case? You get the case? Right? The girl is every time she asks the guy for something, he does it on time. I'm sorry. Every time she asks the guy, he takes his time. Every time he asks her, she does it right away. She got fed up with him, and she also delaying now. So you know what? I had an advantage over you because I knew that this girl finished St. John's University in 2 years and got accepted to dental school. Okay? Now that's literally almost impossible, humanly impossible to do. She was like type A extreme, okay? And I asked her a question. You know what I asked her? I said, when your professor gives you an assignment, when do you do it? She's like, right away. I'm like, what do you think about most people? When do they do it? She's like, she has to think about it, okay? Because she's so used to herself. She's like, I guess they do it later, but I don't understand why. So I said, what about him? When does he do it? He goes, he's the last one to do it. So what did I realize about this couple? She likes doing things right on time, and he's not. So I asked her a question. I said, do you like the fact that he's more relaxed than you? She goes, oh yeah, he makes me feel so good. He calms me down. He relaxes me. So I'm like, okay, let me understand something. You like that he's more relaxed than you? But then, when it comes to getting something done, you want him to be you. It doesn't work like that. And there's many other situations like this. So it's very important when you marry someone or you're in a relationship with someone that's different from you, realize that what they're doing or not doing is not to offend you. They're just being themselves. Now, over time, they should try to accommodate you, but don't take it personally when they're just being themselves. Okay, that's one thing. Another thing that's very important to know in relationships is the difference between comfort and pleasure. Who knows the difference between comfort and pleasure? Anyone want to try to suggest what I'm talking about? Okay. Comfort is not a good thing. Pleasure is a good thing, a healthy pleasure. Rabbi Noach Weinberg of Esha Torah talks about the 5 levels of pleasure. That there's a physical pleasure, and there's higher levels of pleasure, where you live a life in a more meaningful way, which actually has pleasure to it. Atlantic Magazine did a study, and they asked people who's happier, those with kids or those without kids? Who do you think was happier? Without kids. Sorry to burst anyone's bubble. Without kids, they were much happier. But any Bukharians in this room will know what kind of happiness is that? Kaif. Okay? Kaifuye. That's, are you happy? Are you happy? You know what I always tell people? If the guy in the hall has to remind you to be happy 100 times over the wedding, something's wrong. Okay? Something's not right. You know, during COVID, when weddings were much smaller and more personal, I don't think they had to say kaifuye so many times, you know? Because people felt happy just by being there, right? But if we think about it, right? When they asked the question a different way and they said, who has lasting happiness, a deeper happiness, it was the ones who had the children, the ones who had to take care of a parent, the ones who had a lot of responsibilities. One of the reasons why young people today are more depressed than ever is because a lot of them don't have responsibilities and don't even have a plan for responsibilities. They don't even see themselves getting married. It's like they don't see themselves starting a family. It's just about themselves. And the zip codes in the United States that are the wealthiest zip codes have some of the highest rates of depression and anxiety. Now, interestingly enough, it's not because being rich makes you anxious and depressed. I don't think so. I think it's because when a person is rich, a lot of times it makes them realize, why am I not happy? And I think to a certain extent, it actually amplifies their unhappiness. Think about this for a minute, okay? Picture you're a person who has to work really hard to pay the bills. But you pay your bills and you take care of your family. How do you feel about yourself? Pretty good. And now picture you're worth $100 million and you don't need to work. But what are you supposed to do with yourself? And the way Hashem made us is we get pleasure from work. We get pleasure from effort. I saw a comic strip once. You see a guy from outer space, an alien, looking at a gym. And he sees people working out. And the alien is thinking to himself, these people must have like a machine gun next to them, forcing them to do this. Why would anyone do this? But why do people work out? Because there's a pleasure in working out. There's a pleasure in feeling good and taking care of yourself, even if it's hard. So it's very important to know the difference between comfort and pleasure. Comfort is not a good thing. Marriage and relationships are never going to be comfortable. And if they're very comfortable, question if it's a healthy relationship. Sometimes relationships that become very comfortable is because each one is in their own world. This one's on this social media, this one's on that social media. They're not even like connecting to each other. A healthy relationship pushes us, makes us have to think, makes us have to work on ourselves. But there's a tremendous pleasure in that work that we do on ourselves. So I'm just going to look at some of the questions. If people have other questions, please pass them up. I'm going to try to focus on relationship questions if anyone has. So this question is, how do we stay connected in the present of our lives? And how can we remember to always be grateful for things before getting into a serious situation? Wow, very good questions. If other people have questions, please pass them up. I would love to see your questions. So one way to appreciate things before bad things happen is to take a moment. Some people do it as a gratitude meditation. Rabbi Kraft, who I work together with, Anybody here planning to go to St. John's University next year? Okay. If you go to St. John's, you should take Rabbi Kraft's classes, amazing classes. Rabbi Kraft has a class, and the class is a mix of Jews and non-Jews in the class, usually a majority Jews. And he reads them in the class. He reads the prayer, Asher Yatzar. Remember this, right? He reads the prayer, Asher Yatzar. Anyone know what the prayer Asher Yatzar is, right? That's the prayer we say after going to the bathroom. But he doesn't tell them what the prayer is about. And he reads it in English. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, Asher Yatzar et Adam b'chachma, who created us with knowledge, uvaravo nekavim nekavim, made all different arteries and veins. It's known before the one above that if one thing that's supposed to be open is closed, or one thing that's supposed to be closed is open, I will not be able to stand even 1 minute in front of you. And he asked the class, what is this prayer? When is this said? These are people who don't know. He said, if you know, don't answer. And what does the class say? Many of the people say, oh, that must be Rosh Hashanah. That must be Yom Kippur. The holiest day of the year. We stand in front of Aron Kodesh and we say, thank you Hashem for making all these arteries and veins and appreciate what we have. And what's the answer? When do we make this blessing? After going to the bathroom. Well, after going to the bathroom, make a blessing. And this is one of the most important principles of Judaism. That Judaism trains us not to take things for granted. It trains us to appreciate the smallest things. If a person properly understands Judaism, and again, unfortunately, there's a lot of not proper understanding of Judaism, they will see that Judaism is trying to make us refined. Judaism is trying to make us conscious. Even the Shemona Esrei that we say every day is a meditation of connected, to be connected. The Shema is a meditation to be connected. Everything that we do is trying to be more aware and alert. Just an example. The challah, right? In a Jewish home, if bread is on the floor, what do? You pick it up, right? We wrap bread. We don't just throw it in the garbage, right? Anyone know, by the way, why bread is treated differently than other foods? Anyone want to suggest an idea? Why is bread treated differently than other foods? So I'll tell you, thank you. I'll tell you quickly 2 reasons. One reason is because it's a staple of human life. You can survive on bread and water alone. So it's hakarat hatov, it's gratitude to Hashem. But deeper Kabbalistically, we say, you know why bread is treated differently? Because bread is the only food, think of this as an IQ test, okay? How is bread different from any other food staple? Quick, anyone answer, top of your mind. Think of 5 foods: bread, banana, piece of meat, milk. What's the difference between bread and all those, and an apple? What's the difference between bread and all the other ones? No, but what else? What's the difference? Oh, you have to make it. Bread by itself, if I show you where bread comes from, you see a field of wheat, you tell me, this is grass. Buddy, you're nuts. This is not bread, right? But actual bread, especially when they made it back in the day without machines, took 15 different steps. A lot of the Melachot Shabbat I learned from the way we make bread. Why is bread so special? Because bread symbolizes the connection that we have with Hashem. Because Hashem made us in this world to complete the world. So bread is this idea of completion. Because Hashem made the raw materials and we complete it. Okay, whatever the reason is. But if a person treats bread with specialness, it makes them a more refined person. I think it makes them less likely to treat a human being with disrespect. We're supposed to treat an animal with respect. Everything that we do is supposed to make us a more refined person. Okay, we're going to take a few more questions here. How does one set up healthy boundaries between family and marriage when it comes to life decisions? Wow, it's an easy one. Okay, so this is a very tough question, and I'll give you a short, quick answer to it, okay? First thing a person needs to realize is you're not going to make everybody happy all the time. And if you're going to try to make everybody happy all the time, give up now, okay? You know, at Emet, Baruch Hashem, we have literally thousands of students over the years, and one thing you could say about them is almost every single one of them has amazing character traits. I don't know how we were blessed that way, but amazing character traits. But people with good character traits have a problem. You know what the problem is? They have a hard time saying a word that has 2 letters. No. They don't like to say no. They like to say yes to everyone. And what happens when you don't know how to say no? You get stressed, a lot of issues come up. So interestingly enough, one of the issues that I found over the years, and like my Google most asked questions, is nice guys that feel stuck between their wife and their mother. Okay? And a lot of times these guys feel very stuck. They feel like, oh, if I spend more time with my wife, my mother calls me a traitor. If I spend more time with my mother, my wife calls me a mama's boy. And they feel stuck. So you know what they do when they feel stuck? Sometimes they blame their wife for making a problem with their mother. They blame their mother for making a problem with their wife, and they go hang out with their friend. But that's not what we're supposed to do. That's not what we're supposed to do. You know what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to create healthy boundaries, and you're supposed to realize that your wife or your husband is your number one priority, but you still have a mitzvah of kibbut av v'em. You still have a mitzvah to respect your parents. So how do you do that? You know what you do? You use your brains. You use the same thing that's going to help you get into the DAT and the SAT and whatever it is that school you want to get into. One of my rabbis, he passed away years ago, he said, why people come to complain to me, why does God give me complicated problems? So he asked the guy, he was actually a mathematician, the rabbi, and he asked the guy, he goes, what's your IQ? The guy's like, surprised, what are you asking my IQ? He's like, oh, 120, smart guy, smart, good IQ. He's like, let me ask you a question, your IQ is 130, but you're complaining that God doesn't give you problems that you can figure out with an 85 IQ? If you have the 130 IQ, expect to have problems, you're going to have to use your whole seichel, you're going to have to use your whole head. And a lot of times, it's about not trying to make everybody happy, but trying to find the right balance between things, okay? And if a person does that, chances are they'll be fine. Another thing I always tell people is 98% of parents want more than anything else that their kids should be happy. Sometimes their actions don't back that up. Sometimes their actions, because their own anxiety, they're afraid of losing their kids. They actually lose their kids because they're afraid of losing their kids. Anxiety has that way of actually creating the problem that we're afraid of, right? So the most important thing is that you should be happy, and your wife should be happy. But if they're part of the 2% that don't want you to be happy, get them therapy. Okay, so basically, healthy boundaries is essential in a relationship. It's also good to not have family involved in your personal business. You should find other people, rabbis, mentors, coaches, to speak to about your issues, but not necessarily family shouldn't be involved in those things, and it keeps from a lot of problems. Okay. Do we have any other questions to pass up? Okay, if anyone else, you can pass up. I have another short idea I'd like to share with you. What is the most important thing in any relationship? Okay, what's the most important thing to work on? Anyone guess?
Communication.
So I have a little secret for you, okay? It's not communication.
Being reciprocal?
It's not being reciprocal, but that's also very important. And communication is very important. Respect is very important. The first and most important thing to work on in a relationship is the thing you see when you look in the mirror when you're standing in a room by yourself. You know what that is? Anybody? Yourself. Okay? The most important thing to work on in a relationship is yourself. And I know this is not exciting and not what you want to hear. Okay? But people are a mirror of us. The things that bother us about other people are very, very often, the Gemara says this and psychology says as well, the things that are bothering us about ourselves. The things that trigger us, right? You know that word trigger, right? So I always talk about in my classes, if somebody triggered you, right? What does that mean when somebody triggers you? What does that imply? Right? They did something and it made you upset. You know how many couples came to me over the years and the husband said or the wife said, if she would just stop looking at my mom that way, everything would be fine. If she would just stop being so annoyed, stop doing this, don't do this, say this, don't do this, don't say this, don't do this, everything would be fine. Because it triggers me. Now, if you use the example of a gun, right? If I had a gun in my hand right here, okay? And somebody did something that caused me to trigger my gun to go off, right? So we could talk about what you did to cause my gun to go off. Or we could talk about why was Rabbi Rutenberg walking around with a loaded gun with no safety on like this, right? But many of us are this, okay? We're walking around on edge. We're not at peace in ourselves. We don't have calmness. We don't have menuchat hanefesh. We're constantly stressed. We don't know. and then somebody in a relationship says something to us, looks at us the wrong way, does something the wrong way, and we get triggered. So the most important thing in a relationship, it doesn't make a difference if you're dating, if you're married, if you're engaged, it doesn't make a difference, is constantly think about what you can do yourself to become a better version of yourself. Now, having said that, there obviously are things in a relationship that you should not accept. There's behaviors you should not accept. I'm not suggesting that you should just say, okay, anything goes and it's fine. There are certain things that you have to step up and say that's not okay and try to change and put lines, boundaries, and say certain things are not okay. But the first thing a person needs to do is to look into themselves. I'll tell you a story. It's actually a sad story that I share sometimes with the Emma couples. This was a couple that was about 15 years ago. I remember where I was standing when I was talking to this guy. I live in Kew Gardens, so this was I lived in an apartment at the time on Lefferts and Metropolitan Avenue. I don't remember what I ate for breakfast yesterday, but I remember where I was standing 14 years ago. And this guy was married maybe 6 months, and they got into an altercation. Basically, she scratched him, he hit her, the cops were called. It was a bad situation. They're married maybe 6 months. And he's talking to me on the corner of the street. And he looks at me, and I knew him for about 3-4 years before. And he's a smart guy with a master's degree. And he says to me, he goes, do you know me for a while? I said, yeah. He goes, did I have a temper? I said, I didn't see it. So he goes, I'm losing my temper all the time now. It's her fault, right? I'm not exaggerating. Word for word what he said. I didn't used to have a temper. Now I have a temper. It must be it's her fault. So Hashem put a thought into my head at the moment. My father is a scientist, a cancer researcher. So I grew up a lot with science. And my father used an example of faulty logic. Let's imagine this is a frog. And the scientist is doing an analysis on the frog. And the scientist says, jump! And the frog jumps 6 feet. He writes it down. And then he cuts off half the legs of the frog. And he says, jump! And it jumps 3 feet. Then he cuts off all the legs of the frog. And he says, jump! And the frog doesn't jump. And the scientist scratches his head and he goes, frogs without legs must be deaf. No, right? Why is the frog not jumping? Because you cut off its legs. So I asked him, I said, were you married before? He says, no. I said, how do you know she's triggering you? Maybe somebody else would trigger you more. When you were single, you could just go to your basement, ignore the world for 24 hours, come back up, or whatever. But being married forces us, being in a relationship, forces us to work on ourselves in a way that when we're single, we don't. And this is why the Torah teaches us that getting married and being married is actually a goal in life. Not just to get married, but to be married. Not just for the sake of having children. People think it's because of having children. That's obviously a big part of marriage. But if, God forbid, someone's not able to have children, there's still a mitzvah to be married. Why are they supposed to be married? Because we grow as a person when we're in a relationship. The opportunities for chesed, for giving, for caring is unparalleled when you're in a relationship. So this is a very, very important idea to keep in mind when we're in a relationship. And I want to finish off with a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. One of the most famous Mishnayot in Pirkei Avot. Hillel said, Im ein ani li, mi li. Someone translate that for me. Im ein ani li, mi li. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? Who will be for me? You hear these words? Hillel, the great Hillel, said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? What does that sound like? It sounds selfish. It sounds self-centered. Why is he saying this? Does it make sense? I have to just think about myself? But what does he say in the next line? What does the next line say? Im ani la'atzmi ma'ani. If all I am is about myself, what am I? What is Hillel teaching us? What is Hillel teaching us? One of the most important concepts in relationships, which is that I have to take care of myself. In a healthy relationship, you have to have a healthy sense of self. The pasuk says, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." Love your neighbor like you love. What does that mean? If you don't love yourself, you can't properly love somebody else. You're going to have a codependent relationship, unhealthy relationship. You have to properly love yourself. What is the halacha? What is the Jewish law? This is a trivia question. You can tell this to your parents at a Shabbos table. What is the law if you're in the desert and you have one jug of water? One jug of water, okay? You're in the desert and there's no place in sight that you can be able to get other water. And you have just enough water to make it out of the desert. and you see a friend or somebody else who comes to the desert and they say, I can't, can you please share some water with me? What's the law? You're not supposed to share it. You have to take care of yourself and walk out alive. Now, if it's possible for both to survive, obviously you have to try. But if it's not possible, you have a responsibility to take care of yourself. But what's the second line of Hillel? Imanila atzmi ma'ani. If all I am is about myself, what am I? We all know self-centered people. They may have so much and they have nothing. When do we have the greatest sense of self? When do we have the greatest sense of self? When we take care of somebody else, right? The happiest person is one who's taking care of somebody else in a healthy way. And this is the balancing act of life. And one of the things that's so important to understand about Judaism is that the Torah wants us to be balanced. This is a balance. Self-other, self-other. Maybe some of you have a parent who's taking care of their parents. Anybody here have somebody in that type of situation? Where their parents are taking care of their parents. Maybe their parents are in their late 70s, 80s, and the parents are living in their house with them. Somebody has that sort of a situation? I'll tell you what I witnessed with my own eyes. Many situations where you know who is the one who is taking care of the family? Who is the one who usually brings the parent into their house and helps take care of everyone? It's like, usually it's a daughter, and usually it's like the tzaddik of the family, the tzaddikis, the one who's always giving, the one who's always there for the family. But I've witnessed with my own eyes situations where after a few years, they become resentful. And sometimes that person becomes actually mean and even hurtful to the parent. How's that possible? How is it possible someone who's so giving can become hurtful? And the reason is because often what happens is they stop taking care of themselves. And all their family members are on vacation, and this one's in Bermuda, this one's in Bahamas, this one's here, and they say, thank you so much, and that feels good. But what about their own self-care? What about, and I see this also with people sometimes right after they have a baby, their self-care goes out the window. They're so worried about their baby that they don't take care of themselves. And a lot of problems come from this. Why? Because they have to have a healthy sense of self. So one of the things I tell the mothers in that type of situation, I tell the women, go tell your family members, I don't need your thank yous. You take mom Tuesday and Thursday. I'm going away every other weekend. Don't be such a big tzaddik. And then you'll be able to have the energy to be able to give for a much longer time. So this is the balancing act of life, the self and the other. But what's the third statement that Hillel says in that Mishnah? Anyone know the third statement? He says, Im lo achshav, ei matai. What does that mean? If not now, then when? And I always wondered, why is Hillel stick that into this Mishnah? What's the connection between self, the other, and if not now, then when? It's just a potpourri of good advice? And I think the answer is that a lot of times in life, we become afraid. I'm not ready to care about somebody else. I'm not ready to get into a relationship because I don't know about if I'm ready, if I'm this, if I'm that. And Hillel is teaching us that if life is a balancing act, picture you're on a tightrope. How do you walk on a tightrope? Anyone want to try? Picture you're on a tightrope, okay? What do you need to do to make sure you walk across? What else? Keep walking. If you stop, I guarantee you will fall, okay? You might have the perfect balance and you will fall, okay? You have to keep walking. And I think the message over here is that whatever situation we're in life, whatever struggles, whatever challenges we're facing, don't get stuck. Continue moving. Find balance. Get people to guide you in balance, but continue moving. Because I've seen this so many times that people who, let's say, have issues with certain things, whatever it might be, once they start getting into that situation, they will grow from that situation and come out better from there. And finally, just to finish off, somebody said before that the most important thing in relationships is communication. And this is true. Communication is very important. But there's a very famous psychologist. Anyone who's interested in relationships should really study this author. His name is John Gottman. And he's very famous because he has interviewed over 30,000 couples. He lives in Seattle, Washington. And he claims he can see a couple married for 6 months, talk to each other for 5 minutes, and predict with over 90% accuracy if they'll still be married in 5 years. And what do you think the number one thing that he says that makes the marriages work or not work? And it's not communication. Because he said, if you see a couple fight with each other, there's a lot of communication going on. You're this, you're that. What's the number one thing that makes relationships work or not work? And somebody said over here, respect. And what he says is the number one thing is whether deep inside of yourself you have respect for that person, whether you value that person, whether you see the good in that person. If some of you would like to watch something very interesting and funny, there's a great speaker by the name of Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. And he gave a lecture for Emet to couples about 5-6 years ago called How to Like the People You Love. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? How to like the people you love. Anyone want to try to think about what that title, what topic is about? Does that make sense? Wouldn't you say if I love someone, of course I like them? You would think, we think there's like and then there's love, right? There's like is the low level and love is the higher level. So what does it mean how to like the people you love? Anyone want to try?
About his family, but like, do you like spending time with them?
Love is feeling that sense of oneness. Like is respecting the differences. And what we want in our relationships is to love and to like. To feel a sense of oneness, but also to respect the differences. And this is a very, very important thing in relationships. I'll end with this. There's a midrash that says that there's 3 things that are the metaphor for peace. A river, a kettle, and a bird. And I saw a beautiful explanation. The river is very peaceful, right? People like living next to a river. But if I go to a home and I'm a little fly on the wall and I see everyone getting along inside the house, nobody raises their voice, everyone's getting along, is that a peaceful home? Challenge me that it might not be a peaceful home. Challenge me. Anyone? Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Challenge me. Challenge me that it might not be a peaceful home. What? They're afraid to speak, maybe. It's very peaceful, but if you say the wrong thing, or you go against the parent, or you go against this one, you get zapped. Like it could be in North Korea, it's very peaceful, But if you do the wrong haircut, he puts you in a concentration camp, It's very peaceful, it's very peaceful. But you're not allowed to be you. Is that peace? Is that peace if I can't be me? So the bird is a metaphor for a higher level of peace. Because not only is it harmonious, but every bird has their own wings. And yet they fly together as a flock. So they're individuals, but they're still connected. And this is a very high level of peace, because we're able to be our own individuals and still be part of one. But what about the kettle? Anyone want to try to guess how the kettle is a metaphor for peace? What does a kettle do? It boils water, right? In nature, can fire and water coexist? Not really, right? If you have a bonfire, either the fire is winning or the water is winning. They're not both winning, right? Either the water is putting out the fire or the fire is putting out the water. What does the kettle do? The kettle allows the fire to boil the water without the water putting out the fire. And that's the ultimate metaphor for peace. That you're in a relationship with somebody who allows you to grow without it putting them out. That's what we should strive for. So just in summary of everything we spoke about, we talked about the idea of effort versus results. We talked about the importance of not comparing ourselves to anyone else, including our spouse, because what might be easy for them is hard for you, or vice versa. We talked about true happiness has to come from inside. True happiness has to come from a place of feeling, like they say, the present is a present, right? Appreciating what you have right now. We spoke about that everybody here walked in with maybe $200 in the bank account, but walking out with $1 billion in the bank account, okay? Everybody here is a billionaire. Everybody here, if you really internalize and you really connect to the blessings that you have in your life, everybody here is extremely, extremely wealthy. We talked about the idea that comfort versus pleasure, that life is not supposed to be comfortable, but is supposed to be very pleasurable. And one of the reasons why people get depressed when they have a lot of money, for example, is because their life is very comfortable. And they thought that's what they wanted. When life was hard, they said, oh, if I would only be comfortable, everything would be good. And then they got comfortable and they got more depressed. Because comfort was not what they were looking for. I know somebody personally, a guy in his 20s, who made about $5 million, worked really, really hard, sold his company, and he's on a podcast. I can send it to you if anyone wants to know the podcast. And he talked about how, he said within a week after he got his exit, felt down. He didn't even know what to do with himself. Like, what do I do tomorrow? What do I do the next day? Now, I'm not saying we should all feel bad for him. Okay, he's doing okay. But the bottom line is, it's not so simple. It's not so simple. We look at somebody with a lot of money, and we look at them with envy. Like, oh, I wish I had all that money. You know what happens to people once they have a lot of money? They worry about something else. They worry about their health. They worry about their kids. They worry about this. They worry about something else. As soon as we have something, we start worrying about something else. We spoke about the idea of being happy with who we are. We spoke about the importance of not comparing. We spoke about the idea that it's healthy to marry someone different from you, but also to realize that those differences, don't take it personally when the other person doesn't act the way you would act in that situation. And Chazak Baruch, everyone. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, please feel free to come over. Thank you very much.